Hi, good afternoon everybody, and welcome to this week's Women in Recruitment Speak Up Stand Out series. And we've got Lisa Tomlinson who's joined us today, who's founder and CEO of Limelite People Group. Lisa, welcome. Thank you very much for giving us your time today. Lisa's got a background in recruitment and HR, and she set up Limelite to help people, teams and organisations with their value-led transformation. So a topic very close to my heart, Lisa, and we'll be talking today about how culture and inclusion creates competitive advantage. Again, very topical as we think about coming back into the office now after all this time being out, and having to really start to think about how we get the best out of our people in a world which has been turned on its head somewhat, and where there's been a real focus on starting to look at individuals and understanding individuals as human beings. So Lisa, would you like to give everyone a little bit of an introduction or a bit more background to yourself, and then maybe we can get started? And if the audience could send through questions on the chat box, Lisa and I will be monitoring that during the course of the session.
Yeah,
Thank
hi.
you.
So thanks for inviting me along today. I mean, as you said, I've started Limelite People Group after working first in recruitment and then in the public sector in HR, and most recently in a college which is for disadvantaged adults. So in the role that I was in, inclusion and diversity was a really core part, because the college catered for a really diverse cohort of students, you know, from ex-offenders, from modern day slavery victims, you know, people that had suffered domestic violence. There was a whole cohort of very different people. And to get the workforce to reflect those people was kind of one of my jobs in HR, and to make sure everybody had a really good understanding. And it was a kind of golden thread. So one of the reasons I've set up Limelite People Group, I don't just do D&I do kind of cultural change pieces more than that, coaching, L&D, but all based very much on those values. So with my background in recruitment, it was a long time ago, I'm not going to lie, but I'm hoping that I've made this presentation a little bit more relevant. So shall I share my screen?
Yes, Lisa, thank you. And just for the audience, Lisa and I were talking earlier, just saying actually it's really interesting to get people with a different perspective come and speak. So from outside of the industry, that perhaps can help us with more insight actually into how our customers and candidates' experiences are, because we aren't always aware of that when we're sat sort of within our own world of recruitment. So it's really nice that you can bring that perspective in, Lisa.
Thank you. Can I just ask, can you see the chat box, or can I just see the chat box on that screen?
I can see the chat box if I pull it up, so I'll keep it open.
And so I've got the presentation open, but I've also got the chat box, and I just thought,
oh no, we can't see your
yeah,
chat
fine,
box.
okay, so I'll keep an eye on it. You can see the presentation.
Yeah,
good to go. Brilliant.
Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, so I've already introduced myself. Just to say as well as Limelite People Group, I do run a strategic HR community on Facebook called Happy HR, which is about thought leadership, and we do talk a lot about recruitment and how the sector's changing. So I'll talk a little bit about that at the end if anyone's interested.
Lovely.
So for the session, we've got 45 minutes. I'd love it to be really interactive. So do feel free to put something in the chat box, to speak up, to ask questions throughout. I'll try and keep an eye on it. So the first bit is just about inclusion and how that can create a competitive advantage. The second section is about developing a strategy. And then the last section is just about measuring and managing inclusivity. So the first point I wanted to kind of cover really is about what is diversity, because I think often, particularly now actually, diversity has become a little bit about, you know, a few characteristics, but it's so much wider than that. And it's something I'm really passionate about in terms of inclusion is better for everybody. But you'll know that there's 9 protected characteristics that are protected more by law. If you know one of those protected characteristics, do me a favour and put them in the chat box now and see whether we can get all of them. But where I come from with diversity is not just about those 9 protected characteristics. There's a lot about class diversity. So I work with a lot of solicitors, and they're very keen to get people that aren't just from a graduate pathway, because they were finding that that's really stifling for their diversity. So they've created apprenticeship programmes, work experience programmes. There's political diversity. So in the charity that I worked in, we had a lot of left-wing liberal people, you know, and you kind of think, you know, if there was a right-wing person, they probably wouldn't have fitted in. You know, so there's all different kinds of diversity, neurodiversity, as well as those 9 protected characteristics. I'm also a DISC practitioner, and I know back in recruitment, it used to be Thomas International when I worked at Pertemps. And I know a lot of agencies use different types of psychometrics, but this is just another kind of elaboration of there's lots of different types of diversity. I was talking this over with a friend in recruitment yesterday, actually, and she was saying that she found DISC really, really great in terms of thinking about diverse types of people and how to influence them through the recruitment process. So if she was working with somebody that was from the C category, they would like to reflect on things and they'd like a lot more detail, and they wouldn't accept an offer straight away. They'd be very hesitant. Whereas somebody from a D category, they'd be very, yeah, I'll accept it. Yeah, I'll go to interview. And because she was from the D category, she used to be put off a little bit by people that weren't. But once she understood the different types of people they are, she was able to work a lot more effectively with different types of candidates, and also understand what different types of clients wanted. So they might want a bit more that's on a CV, they might want more detail about a person. So just another point of diversity there. And then just to cover what inclusion is. So I know this is a bit of a fuzzy picture, but it's great to elaborate the point. In the first picture there, that is what a lot of people think equal opportunity means. They think it's treating everybody the same. And obviously, if you do that, you disadvantage some people. As you can see, the shorter person can't see the cricket game. In the middle is equity, and that is raising people differently to enable them to meet the same goals. Inclusion is actually going, why do we have that barrier there? Why can't we just remove it and then it's better for everybody? And that's why I like inclusion. So the first poll that we've got today, I just wanted to get a gauge of how many people that are watching this have a diversity strategy, a statement or an action plan. So Kelly, if you're able to launch the poll for me. There we go. And we'll just give that 60 seconds or so just for you to complete that poll and just say, do you currently have a diversity strategy, statement or action plan to show clients if they ask you? Okay, so just another few seconds on that. Lovely. So if we can end that poll and let's have a look at the results. I'm very interested to see this. So 91% of people have a diversity strategy, statement or action plan to show clients. That's fantastic. That's really reassuring, because working with a number of different recruitment agencies, I know some do and some others that I've worked with don't at all. But yeah, less than 10% of you don't at the moment. So that's brilliant. Thank you, Kelly. Brilliant. Okay, so competitive advantage is so important at the moment. There's a McKinsey study just come out, and I don't know if anybody's read it. It's only came out in May, so it's brand new. But it's actually said that now 85% of employers are saying that increasing diversity in their workforce is a priority. But half of employers don't have programs in place to attract diverse candidates. So what I'm seeing is a really big kind of knowledge gap and a really big area that recruitment agencies and other supporting agencies can be providing solutions for people if you're not already. So you'll see some really great stats on the right hand side as well. So diverse organisations have greater financial return. These are all from lots and lots of research. They're not just statements we're putting out there. You know, this is evidenced now. A diverse organisation has happier and more productive teams. There's whole loads of Harvard Business Review articles on that if you follow them. And also higher levels of innovation. And innovation at the moment is something that companies are striving for that competitive advantage. You know, how do you set yourself aside from somebody doing the same thing? Often it's the people, it's the organisation. As well as that, I think the world being how it is, I don't know if you've heard of VUCA, but the world is kind of volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. And one way to tackle the kind of, you know, COVID situation, climate change, is actually having innovation. So those companies that made gin and swapped to making hand sanitizer overnight and made huge amounts of money, that's innovation. So higher levels of innovation, again, great for competitive advantage. So a couple of key statistics: 15 to 20% of the population is currently ethnically diverse, depending what area you're in. I'm in Birmingham, and it's higher here. I think we're on track to be the most diverse city, if we're not already. That's increasing to 30% by 2030. So within 10 years, a third of the UK is going to be ethnically diverse. There's over 14 million disabled people in the UK, but over 60% of them are unemployed. You know, huge untapped market. There's 1.2 million over 16s identifying as LGB. Obviously, that terminology is from the census. You know, usually there'd be a few more letters after that, but that's specifically from the census data. So companies in the top quartile for gender diversity on executive teams were 25% more likely to have above average profitability. I think that was actually from a women in recruitment statistic. But FTSE 100 CEOs are still more likely to be called Dave or Steve than be female. And 24 billion could be gained by increasing diverse representation into the economy. So the real burning platform here, you know, there's all of that. There's the skills shortage, which from what I've been hearing and from what I've been seeing, there's a lot of unemployment come from COVID, but it's tended to be unskilled workers or hospitality, or the kind of lower skilled workers. Actually, the skills shortage for professional services, you know, in certain sectors is still just as glaringly obvious as it was. There's candidate expectations. So Gen Zs, you know, the wokes, they do have a values-based approach to life, which is fantastic. And they do have higher expectations that any organisation or agency they go to, you know, is going to respect that. There's having a level of EDI understanding in your business, and the reputational damage that can come if there isn't. So we've all seen, was it Starbucks, and having to roll out unconscious bias training very, very suddenly. I think, was it Nike as well recently? But this is, you know, a regular thing. It doesn't take much to damage the reputation. And then there's pay gap reporting. We've already got gender pay gap reporting. It's quite likely it's going to be ethnicity pay gap reporting soon as well. So, you know, that is pushing organisations to care far more about this. And then just to reflect the clients. So the more diverse the clients become, you know, the more you need to reflect that as a supporting service. I feel like you all know this because 90% of you have got a strategy or a statement, but hopefully there's some extra information you're picking up there. So when we're talking about providing this solution, so the strategy that you've got in place already, there's three really key areas to developing a strategy and framework in this area. Policies, procedures and processes is one part, and that's the part that often gets focused on first. So, you know, a policy for this, how you change your processes and what the procedures look like. But actually, the really important part is culture, training and leadership. For me, that's probably the key. So you've got to have buy-in from leadership. You've got to have a really good level of education and understanding in the workforce. And the culture has to reflect what's written in the policies. And that's often where there's a real mismatch. And then data and objectives. So do people in your organisation have objectives around diversity? Does your organisation have targets? Are the targets on the website? Are you collecting data? Are you reporting on that? So the first point there, policies, procedures and processes. Now, this is the bit where I ran it past my friend in recruitment, because I put on quite a lot about what I'd normally talk to organisations about in terms of diverse shortlisting, anonymised CVs, panel interviews, sending out interview questions in advance. And I know that that's not relevant for recruiters, so that's why I've taken that out. But actually, a quick conversation with Natasha before this session, we were talking about the fact that it may not be relevant for you as a recruiter, but actually when you're having those conversations with clients, those are the type of things you can be suggesting to them if they've got this problem. What I thought about in terms of how this might be a bit more relevant for recruiters. So there's the language that the job adverts, the language that things are written on your website, the language that's attracting people to your organisation. And there's certain tools that can help with that. So there's gender bias tools on the internet, there's proofing tools that you can run job roles through, and it will tell you whether any of the language is either not very accessible because it's sector specific language, and it's not inclusive to attract everybody because it might put people off, or if it's too masculine, and if you're trying to get females into engineering, for instance. So that's one area. Where the adverts get placed. So not everybody does go onto Indeed and those websites. There is people that don't, and I totally take it's dependent on the role as well. So for some roles you definitely wouldn't go into the job centre, and when you need to move quickly that wouldn't be appropriate. But equally, you know, job centre could be an option. Working with diverse partners and partnerships and outside organisations can really help. So it's kind of who sees what and what are they seeing and where is it. And then really examining barriers as well. So in the public sector, it's quite common to have a really lengthy application form, and there's AI in place in a lot of organisations that will knock people out of the spelling mistakes. And just looking at what the barriers are. So, you know, you've got a dyslexic person, you know, Richard Branson, they're applying for a job and an AI program has knocked them out because they put a spelling mistake. You know, unless you're doing really, you know, finite data entry, I'd say spelling might not be that important, especially if it was like a sales role. So just looking at what could cause a barrier for people. And then just an accessibility check of your website as well. So, you know, what role models are on there, how many clicks until you see diverse people, what statements are on there. So even if your organisation isn't diverse, is there a very clear statement on there that somebody that's diverse that's looking at your website might say, there's nobody diverse there, but actually they care because they've got a statement. Yeah, I think I'll talk a little bit about gamification and web crawling software. There's all kinds of tech as well that can be used for those policies and procedures. So the second bit on this strategy breakdown was about culture. And this model comes from somebody called Shine, who writes a lot about culture. And it's weird language, but just ignore that. So artifacts, Shine says, is policies, procedures, statements, and schemes. So that's what we've just talked about. But actually where a culture is made is this middle bit, this exposed values. And that's the values that you're putting out to everybody. So that is what's normal in your organisation. You know, is it normal for people to work flexibly, or is it normal to be in the office 8 till 6 and not leave until after the boss leaves? True story from someone I know in recruitment. You know, is it normal to have Thirsty Thursday and crack the beers open? You know, there's all kinds of things that go on that can say a lot about your organisation. The language that's used there, the language that's accepted. You know, there's words now that you wouldn't say 10 years ago, you know, but are they still kind of a bit of banter in the office? Role models again, and boundaries. So where do you performance manage people? Where's that line set where you go, no, that's, you know, that's beyond our boundary there. And a further thought about how you can measure that and how you can kind of get a bit of an idea of what's going on in your organisation is about kind of candidate experience, getting feedback, and really analysing the statistics, which we'll talk about a bit later. So the very third level of this cultural kind of pyramid is the basic assumptions. And this is where your unconscious bias comes in. So this is more about not what you're like in the office, but what are your people like when they're in the pub with their mates on a Friday night after a couple. And it's that unconscious bias. So, you know, what's our background? Where have we come from? Yeah. So just one more word on culture. Obviously, this is only 45 minutes. I could do like a whole morning just on culture, but a key point is that an inclusive culture celebrates difference. It's not a culture where you have to fit in and conform to be included. So if you're trying to look for kind of a cookie cutter candidate and you're saying, this is the candidate I've got in my head that would really fit this organisation, it's flipping that and be like, actually, what do this organisation need that's different to bring something to that team, to get that innovation going, to challenge them a little bit. So just seeing difference actually is a really good thing that can bring some really good value. And
Lisa,
helping.
sorry just to interrupt you there, but I think your point around working with customers, again, quite often as recruiters, we won't be challenging the customer to say, you know, what difference could we bring that would change the balance of your team, or disrupt a little bit, or bring extra thinking. And I think too often we'll take a requirement from a client around a candidate specification and won't even challenge them to maybe think about what are those things of difference that could come in that would add value, or representing a candidate's points of difference in that way. So that's really useful.
Yeah, no, thank you. And there's a slide coming up that might help with that. I think it's about 3 slides along, so keep with me. So yeah, education is the most powerful weapon that we have to change the world. Nelson Mandela is one of my favorite. It's probably my tagline, if I had a tagline, because I just love learning about things, and I love the transformation that can have. You know, it truly is kind of transformational when you open your eyes to some things that you didn't know before. But the point of this slide really is that if you educate the whole organisation, so the top right down to the bottom, then everybody there is able to have those conversations and not shy away from them. So not think, am I using the right words? Am I going to say something and get called out on it? You know, this cancel culture. It's a really scary kind of thing to talk about if you don't feel secure. I mean, you know, I got called out because I used BAME on a network the other day, and I don't normally. I say ethnically diverse, and I just slipped and I used BAME, and it was, you know, let's not use BAME because it does kind of group everybody that's not white together in a pot and lots of other things. You know, and there is that fear when you're having these conversations, and the way to overcome that is to have the conversations in a safe space. You know, educate people, not a tick box unconscious bias session, not an online, we've all done it, so we're all fine now. It's constant, it's going into intersectionality, it's learning specifically about different types of people. And you know, it's an ongoing thing because this changes all the time. It's not a, you know, now you've learned all of this, you know it all. It literally changes. Like BAME was fine 6 months ago, BAME now has some issues. You know, so you've got to kind of keep it up. The way we did that in my organisation was to set everybody objectives and make sure that they knew that this was one of our values. You know, it was a really key thing, and manage people, you know, if they weren't really showing that value in the organisation. And senior leaders all had objectives around going out and finding their own information about this. So when you educate people, they become allies and they become advocates. And they don't just have that internally. What they do is they go out and talk to people and they spread the word, and then word can get around that you're a great agency and that you don't discriminate and that you care about this. And that's maybe how you'll then get a lot more diverse candidates going, you know, this is the place that I can go to and not worry that I'm going to have that experience. So this is the slide I was talking about, Natasha. So having challenging conversations with clients. I know from working in recruitment that one of the first things that you're taught is objection handling. So you probably know a lot more about this than me, actually. But this is some methods that you can handle objections and have those conversations with clients. So build interest and rapport, you know, you don't need me to tell you about that. It's basis of recruitment, isn't it? But when somebody has an objection, you know, so if you make a suggestion to them and say, you know, oh, you know, actually this person's a bit of a curveball, but I feel like, you know, they've got something great they could bring to your team. You can explore the doubts. You can shape the lens as well. So you can, you know, shape the lens on all those burning platforms we talked about at the beginning. What great things, you know, can diverse people bring to this? You know, if the business has got business objectives, if they've got ambitions to go somewhere, you know, how can you tie in all those burning platform points and tie them into where that business is going and say, you know, actually, I'm a recruiter, I'm an expert in this because I deal with people all the time, you know, and I think that, I trust my word, I think this person can bring something that's great for the future, and keep them engaged in the conversation. So, you know, it's really easy to kind of turn people off with this subject, but actually kind of being passionate and open about it yourself, people really get drawn into it and they really say, you know, can I learn more from you? And if you're, as a recruiter, the experts, you know, that gives you a competitive advantage. because you're not just then a recruiter, you're somebody that's providing this solution to this problem they have. So you can address, you know, if there's a candidate that you're sending, I mean, I'm sure you all do this, but if there's a candidate you're sending that is disabled, for instance, you know, address the elephant in the room, talk about it openly, reframe. So look at the benefits rather than you know, you might instantly think, oh, the client might not like this person because X, Y, Z, but reframe it and say, you know, the client might actually really like this person because they've got a disability confident charter, and actually I'm providing them with some evidence to get a better, higher level on that. So there's all kinds of things going on that you can kind of, you know, reframe that argument around. And then just your kind of normal stakeholder management techniques. So key phrases, talking their language, find out what's keeping them awake at night. One of the best things I was ever told in my career, find out what's keeping people awake at night and give them a solution. And you can literally persuade anybody by doing that. Does that help, Natasha?
Yes, it does. Thank you. And I think it's a challenge often, I think, for us as recruiters, is to feel confident actually to have that conversation with an end client. And it's something that if we can get better at doing it, I am sure actually in time we will find the clients are more receptive actually, because if they're on this journey with us, then hopefully we'll be helping each other to evolve and create a better and more inclusive recruitment process.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think, no, thank you. I think sometimes it's about realizing what's our assumptions as well about the client. I mean, I know I was young, I was very young when I worked in recruitment and didn't know any of this. And, you know, I would definitely really judge, really make assumptions. In those days, you could write whatever you liked on the back of the application form, actually, as long as you put IMO, in my opinion, you could literally write, you know, green hair, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right, actually, quite often we wouldn't go into we would maybe make our own assumptions around where discrimination or bias might kick in. And actually that's us causing an issue, not somebody else, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So this is time for the second poll now. So I was just keen to know, have you ever been asked to provide a certain type of candidate? So Kelly, if you're able to have the second poll, that would be awesome. Okay, so let's just leave that open for 30 seconds or so. So talking to my friend in recruitment, she quite regularly gets asked, you know, we want somebody diverse for this role. Have you got anybody diverse? And what they mean by that generally is ethnically diverse. So she said it was quite interesting to think you could go back and say, you know, actually, yeah, this person's on the autistic spectrum, or this person, you know, seems to be quite different from other people you've got because they're younger. So looking at the different characteristics rather than just instantly going to a certain type of diversity. Okay, then if we can have the results of that poll, that would be awesome. Okay, so 70% of people have specifically been asked for a certain type of candidate. Wow, it's really interesting. I mean, if we had more time, I'd be so interested to hear how you handled that as well. But yeah, really interesting. Thank you. So if we can close that. Thank you, Kelly. I'm not used to having someone do the tech. It's lovely. So I don't know if you know positive action versus positive discrimination, but I thought it's probably a key point to add in if you don't. So positive action, if you don't know, is where if you've got two candidates and they are the same, they have the same qualifications, they have the same level of experience, and they've kind of got the same kind of background for the role, you are allowed to choose the person that's from an underrepresented group, because they're adding something extra. Positive discrimination is where you've got two candidates and one of them isn't as qualified, but is from an underrepresented group, and you choose them anyway. So it's where you give it to the underrepresented person, despite the fact that somebody better for the job than them. And that's what you're not allowed to do. That's unlawful. And the police have got into trouble quite recently with some cases around that. So again, being able to explain that to an employer in a kind of friendly way, you know, if you don't, you know, you maybe know all that already, but if you can have those conversations with employer, it could also help them to avoid cases and case law.
I think that's really important, Lisa. I get asked that quite a lot by people. So I think you've touched on something that not everyone always knows how to handle. So thank you. That's really helpful.
Good. Never want to feel like I'm teaching my grandma to suck eggs.
Yeah, well, that's because we do this all day, every day, and you know, actually, it's a really good. It's good to refresh yourself on some of this too, even when one does know it. Sometimes it's quite good to reflect on, you know, some of the detail around why we're doing it, the best practice, and yeah, so it doesn't become just a, you know, we're not robots doing it. We're actually thinking about it. So it's really helpful.
Good. So yeah, I mean, there's no time to have a real kind of unconscious bias session, but this is one of the best things I saw in unconscious bias. So if you don't know, I imagine you all do, unconscious bias is where your brain fills in the gaps. So our brain fills in gaps all the time, because if it didn't, the amount of information we'd take in would just overwhelm us. So every day, at every opportunity, our brain is filling in gaps, but sometimes it can fill those gaps in incorrectly. And that's where assumptions come in. So if you're able to put in the chat, for me, the chat is empty, but I don't know if there's other, is the chat empty, Natasha? Yeah, okay. So if everyone's able to put in the chat, whether they think the first table or the second table is longer, that would be really good. I'll just give it a couple of seconds. Okay, there doesn't seem to be a lot. Oh, there we go. Thanks, Lorraine. Thanks, Kat. There's a bit of a delay, obviously. Yeah, so the first table looks longer. And this gets me every time. And I've seen it so many times. And obviously I've posed the question as which is longer, but they're actually the same size. It's an optical illusion. And this is where our brain is filling in the gap to say that one's longer than the other. And I can show you that they're the same size. And you'll think there's some jiggery pokery going on, but there's totally not. They're actually exactly the same size. And that's just to say, sometimes we think something, but our brain is filling in the gaps incorrectly. So with bias, it was interesting when I was putting this session together, because I had quite a lot on policies and procedures. And actually, after talking to my friend in recruitment, I decided to focus a lot more on bias, because the difference, I think, in HR is there's a lot more time. You know, in an organization, there is that you're able to anonymize CVs. It's very heavily policy and process driven. You're able to do different shortlisting. You're able to get a panel. You're able to do different tasks, etc. In recruitment, I know that when that job comes in, you're just trying to get through as many candidates as you can to get the ones you can as quick as you can, because that's how you operate. I actually used to have a box of cards to flick through for temp jobs back in the day. So actually, it's a really autonomous role for you as a recruiter, because a lot of it sits on you that would normally sit with a number of people. And I know you're just putting the candidates forward to the organisation, but it's really key that you're you know, not your bias isn't coming out during that process, and that you're putting those, you know, the candidates forward, putting diverse candidates forward. So actually, bias probably is one of the biggest parts for you as a recruiter, and kind of overcoming that. I mean, you probably have seen these before because you'll have done unconscious bias training, but that kind of halo and horns where you get an instant like or dislike based on, you know, maybe I like their fashion style, maybe they've got horrible shoes, and then you just don't like, you know, it just puts you off. There's confirmation bias. So maybe you think that you don't like their shoes, and then the rest of the interview, they say lots of things that reaffirm that, you know, they're maybe not the type of person. There's affinity bias. And that's where we really feel an affinity with somebody because they're like us, you know. So, oh, we've all worked in recruitment, so we've got like an affinity together because we're all, you know, we're all in this in club. Conformity bias, so maybe where you feel that you have to conform to your client. So, you know, if your client is a certain type of person, you know, you have to conform to their expectations, and you maybe don't feel confident enough to challenge those, and, you know, put forward diverse candidates because you think that, you know, that might look less favorably. Contrast bias, so speaking to somebody really good and then the next person seems rubbish because the first person was really good. And then non-verbal bias as well, so that's kind of based on physical body language and things like that. More relevant for interviewing, I think. So the third poll today is how many people collect equality and diversity data from candidates at the moment? So Kelly, if you're able to launch that poll, thank you. And again, we'll just do that for 30 seconds. And if you can just let me know if you collect equality and diversity data from candidates at the moment. And I'm really interested to see this one.
And Lisa, do you mean candidates that we recruit to work for ourselves as a recruitment business or for our clients?
I would see this as candidates that go forward to clients. So people that maybe apply for a job that you're advertising, and then you shortlist them and then you send them through to clients. So do you collect the data, equality and diversity data of you know, what they're like, and then maybe how many of that type of characteristic goes through to get the job, and at which point they drop out. Okay, thanks, Kelly. Let's see the results. No, 50-50. Okay, that's higher than I thought it would be, actually. And that's really good. Yeah, 50-50, really interesting. Now, Natasha, you mentioned this earlier when we were talking, didn't you? About a really good case study about when you were collecting data and you analysed data. So do you want to talk us through that case?
Yeah, I can share that quickly with you. And I mean, actually, I know that we can't store a lot of data. So when we collect data, it's often for sort of a one-time use, isn't it? Rather than being held then on record against people's files. So certainly in my time, we weren't able to, we had to determine whether someone was male or female from their name and use AI to try and drive that data through. But we did a study with one of the brands that I worked with around the number of female candidates that we would have come in through the door and apply for roles, and looking at the conversion rate of those female candidates during the recruitment life cycle. And naturally, it was a tech business, so naturally 20% of our candidates coming in were female, but actually less than 20% were converting through to interview. However, when females did get interviewed, they were 30% more likely to get hired. And when I tried to explore what was happening, what came out was that actually our consultants were discriminating against female candidates, albeit there weren't as many of them, but they were discriminating against them often early on, both male and female recruiters, because the female candidates were harder to place because they wanted more information. They couldn't drop things to go for a job interview, you know, instantaneously, because they might have kids at home or responsibilities. They were more loyal to their existing employer, so they may be more likely to drop out. And there were a number of reasons, and all of them I completely got, because yes, as a female, those would probably be the traits that I would display. However, actually, if someone understood that and worked with me in a different way and appreciated those things that I needed, I would be as good a candidate, and as the evidence showed, probably better in terms of being placeable often than a male counterpart. But people were just seeing that it's too difficult, rather than, as you said earlier, seeing that difference as a positive thing and working with it.
Yeah, yeah. And you found, didn't you, that actually the female candidates were 30% more likely to get the jobs. So if they put that effort in, actually 30% more likely to make a placement with the candidates.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's often what it's about, is, you know, yeah, it's easy to go for the person that doesn't need any adjustment, that, you know, doesn't need anything shaped around them. But, you know, as the world grows, it's just unrealistic. And actually the longer term benefits of making a little adjustment can be huge, you know, as we probably all know, because I imagine there's a lot of females on the call with recruitment.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just going to go for this slide next, because the point there, I think, is about what gets measured gets managed. Now, you had a point there about GDPR. So for candidates, we had the same issue. So for candidates, we could only keep their personal data for 6 months. But actually, when candidates applied, we had them fill out a separate EDI form that doesn't have their name. So you get the EDI statistics and you can keep those forever, because it's not personal data, because it has no name attached to it.
And could you then, because I think our challenge as recruiters is, if you can't log it next to the name, then you can't analyse your shortlist, because you don't know what data sits against your name.
Well, no, but when you do it in a different way. So you say out of all the candidates we've had apply for all the roles in the last 6 months, 10% have been ethnically diverse. Out of all the candidates that have been placed, only 4% were ethnically diverse. And you don't need to necessarily track the two, but you can compare and you can say, actually 8%, 10% applied, 8% got an interview, but only 3% got placed. Okay, well, actually that's the client then where there's some work to do. And maybe we can do a bit of work in sending out really good fact sheets and educating the client somehow, or adding that value.
So it's more of a holistic picture rather than a specific to a particular vacancy or requisition.
Yeah, that's it. And then, I would say that whenever you embark on anything like this, you should definitely measure at the start, because how can you see how far you've traveled? How can you see if things work? If you can't measure. So if you're not measuring, I'd say that's the first thing that you should get done, is start measuring and getting that data. Because then you can start seeing trends, then you can start making interventions, then you can start seeing if it's really making an impact. You might even be able to say, actually, of the clients that placed, a really good percentage of diverse candidates, actually they've gone on and their profits are higher. You might be able to say something like that and build it into your own business case. Because if clients that care about diversity are making more profit and growing, that's good for your business strategy as a recruiter, isn't it?
Right. I think the challenge we have is ring fencing it on a customer basis, because then you have to be very specific about the customer data, and that's where I think the challenge comes in for people, actually. And I think this is an area that's going to have to get fixed, because if you're right, if we don't measure it, we don't get to impact. If we don't measure it, we can't understand where the problem areas are. And if we do have to report on things, and we do have to be able to store data to be able to generate that reporting at a later stage, that's finding ways of, like you said, collecting the data, storing it safely and within GDPR, but also it not becoming, but keeping its value at the same time. So I think that's probably a bit of a challenge that we still got to work with going forward in terms of how best to use it.
So Ruth's asked a question there. So do you send the form 3 times? Once at application, once at interview, and once when placed? So I mean, obviously I do it from an employer point of view, and how we would do that is, when they fill out the application form, they would fill out an EDI form that's anonymous. Then when they start with us, they would fill out another EDI form as a member of staff. So we'd get those 2 touch points. And there is a way that we then, with the interviews, we can see who's made the interview, and we can see their EDI form there. But as a recruiter, you'd have to think about how you were going to do that. But you've all got fancy systems, because I didn't have an ATS. We did it all manually on spreadsheets, because we're only small. So actually, it's probably more about your ATS and how you can get that to guide you. At the larger college I worked at, the ATS did it all, and it just spat out the reports that were automatically generated. So it didn't create a kind of burden of work either. But what I would expect in the next 5 years is that a lot of people will have some kind of report like that, some kind of statement, some kind of targets, and that public sector particularly, but other large employers as well, might expect to see that as part of a preferred supplier list SLA, essentially. Okay, so just to finish off then, so inclusive recruitment in inclusive leadership in recruitment. I had a bit of a think about what this might look like, and some of the things that struck me were, I haven't really talked about recruitment organisations as an employer, but there's an internal piece of work there about, is flexible working a thing? When I was in recruitment, it used to be very much females stayed to a certain point, went off and had their family and didn't go back in. And that's what happened with me, because I didn't want to work full time 8 till 6 and be having calls at night when I had 2 kids. So there's that internal kind of, how inclusive is the organisation? How inclusive are the leaders internally? How educated? But for me, I think recruitment is just so well placed to really add value in this for society, for clients. I just think you're so well placed to make a massive impact to this, in terms of social justice. And this is really big external piece, which I just think has got so much potential. And that's the value add for clients. Recruiters becoming advocates and allies for disadvantaged groups. I just think it, you know, it's something I'm really passionate about, and I think it's something that's really good for society. We've got a great, you know, burning platform there with all of those different stats, so it's something that can be embraced. I think it's only a good thing. Challenging as well, we already talked about. And then the last point, I could have done a whole slide on this as well, but shaping the future. And this is something that I'm talking about quite a lot of my strategic HR group, because recruitment seems to be a bit disruptive at the moment. There seems to be a lot of new things coming in. You know, there's somebody I did a podcast with recently has a video platform where he does a disc profile, he does a video, he does an interactive CV that follows the candidate. And he does the same for the client, where he gets a videographer, they go in, they take a video of the client. And when I said to him, have you thought about EDI? And he was like, no. And he showed me one of the videos from the client, and it was kind of two white blokes kind of manspreading, saying that they wanted somebody like-minded to fit into their organization. And I was like, yeah, you know, I know that's probably what they think they want, but as a woman watching that, I wouldn't want to apply there probably, you know, and as another type of candidate, I might not, because it didn't seem very inclusive. So there's the whole video recruitment thing, there's a whole people putting in different ways to apply for jobs. So, you know, video CVs, there's normal CVs disadvantage a lot of different people. There's apprenticeships, graduate programs, there's work experience for people that actually want to come and try the job. There's sending questions in advance. There's all these kind of innovative ways that recruitment is developing. And I think that somewhere people have got to be getting that D&I point in there. And in public sector, again, they do equality impact assessments. And I don't know if that's something that maybe in the future could be considered. Okay, so key takeaways for the session. Inclusive cultures are better for everyone. Diverse organisations are more successful. A D&I strategy gives you the competitive advantage. Well done, 90% if you have one. Removing bias is really key, and educating everybody creates advocates at all levels. And then just lastly, how I can help. If you want to talk to me about anything, my organisation looks at training, coaching and strategic change and culture. And if you wanted any further reading, I don't know if we're going to be sharing slides from today, but these are some of the references for where I researched for today's session. So I hope everybody's found that useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Does anyone have any further questions for Lisa? Please do put them through if you do. But Lisa, that was really, really interesting. Thank you, and very practical and helpful. And I think you hit the nail on the head for me at the start when you said this all starts with culture, and it starts with the people that set the tone for the culture, which is the leadership, and the people that set the boundaries for what's acceptable and not acceptable. And as you said, the ones that allow how it's done round here to manifest itself. And if we get a lot of that right, then I think some of the other things that people are bringing in as interventions possibly will become less important, because if the culture is one where people are recognised for being individuals, if the barriers, as you showed in that image, are removed, then actually you don't have to start worrying about some of these policy procedure interventions. It's good to have them and it's good practice, but we won't really have to engage with them as much if we get that bit right. So I think that's really, really helpful. And actually being able to understand the culture that you've got from a values perspective is also really important. And we are just about to, just for the panel's interest with APSCO, we are just about to hopefully launch a values-based assessment of the recruitment industry to try and decode what the recruitment industry culture is like, with an organisation that I partner with that effectively decode organisational culture. And we thought if we could do that across the industry, we'd get this benchmark for the culture, and we'd be able to slice and dice it by certain segments, and then companies could start to see how they compared with that. And that comes from a place of values-based culture, as you talked about. The other thing I think you touched on that for me was really relevant is the fact that as an industry, we should be leading on this, because we're at the start of the process, and we are so influential in what goes on within the life cycle of hiring. And therefore for us not to understand this would be criminal, I think, really.
Do you know what, I really agree, and I just think you're in such an important part. And my friend who works in recruitment, who I was referring to throughout, she off her own back, in her own free time, did a research report on I think it was HR's well-being during the pandemic or something along those lines, you know, which is EDI related because it's kind of mental health. And I know the backlash she got from within her organisation, where they just didn't understand, you know, why aren't you calling clients? Why aren't you hitting your targets? She was hitting her targets, but why, you know, why aren't you at the desk making phone calls? Why are you doing this? And actually, as a HR person that uses recruitment agencies as a client, that's the kind of thing that sets you aside from somebody else. You know, if I still worked at Faircroft, where EDI was a core for us, and it is in many other organisations, that would set you aside from somebody else. But the people above were quite ignorant of that. They're like, it's all about the money.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and the money will just follow this if you get it right anyway, won't it? So you kind of can start with the higher purpose and meaning, and then by default, actually, your performance should follow through. So yeah, I completely agree with you, and it's been something I've been very much myself championing, is this concept of how can we possibly not get this and be in a position to educate our customers. And I think customers will respect us and value that contribution. So thank you for giving us those really practical takeaways that we can all go and use in our own businesses tomorrow.
Just on that, I mean, you know, again, you probably know more about this than me, but whilst I was at Faircroft and I had hundreds of agencies contacting me, speccing people in, I actually never took a cold call. I never answered a spec email. They were not the way that you would have got to me. The way that you would have got to me is value add. And, you know, that is providing me something, you know, being in the same circles, speaking the same language. And that for me is where recruitment goes now. It's a partnership, and it's got to be that true partnership. It's not a cold call, you know, sector anymore. I don't think that works, particularly where I was.
Not when you want to build sustainable business relationships. No, I agree. So thank you, really great. And I hope that as a panel you enjoyed that and took something from it too. And thank you for joining us today. Have a lovely bank holiday weekend, everybody. Let's hope the sunshine stays out for a change. And we'll be back after the bank holiday for a continuation of our session. So thank you all. Lisa, would you like to stay on for a moment whilst everyone exits, and then we can just wrap up? Thank you, everyone.
As well for the comments.